Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition here to give you a quick recap on last night's Committee of the Whole meeting. But before we get started, Heather, how are you doing?
Good. Warming up from a really cold track meet last night, but the sun's shining. We'll take that in Minnesota today.
Awesome. Well, do you want to give us a quick recap of last night's school board meeting?
Yeah, so last night was a committee of the whole meeting, and it seems like the board is going to continue for this committee of the whole meetings to stay in a new format. So they were sitting around tables with district staff and much more of a conversational style of meeting. It started with Director Elamine and Superintendent Cox really giving us sort of some context or some understanding for why the board was getting ready to have this conversation around school transformation, MPS district transformation. And so they really talked a lot about that, their reasons for being here, where we are in this, how we got here. We just finished this long budgeting process, right? And then Dr. Webb, who's been facilitating several meetings with the board, guided the board through some processes and some conversations and really grounded them, really talking about like, what is the role of the board? What is the role of administration? What are the values that we want to have? What are the non-negotiables that we want to have? And then they just did a lot of conversing and talking. Board members went into partners and then shared back out, talked about values and non-negotiables. Really, sort of, this was an opportunity for district administration to really listen to the board. We didn't get to a place where there was like a definitive list. It sounds like we're going to be having this conversation again, and it was iterative. But yeah, I think that was the rundown of it. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, they talked about, how they want to engage community during this process, how they want to, what are their non-negotiables and principles that they want to build a list on, and how are they defining school transformation? Because I think that's still up for conversation and debate amongst the board. And it was interesting to hear everybody's individual thoughts, I thought. So, yeah, so my slide of the night, there weren't as many slides again in this new kind of format of the committee of the whole. But I thought this was an important slide that was shared last night, especially in the context of one, a young board, and then two, a board that's engaging in a conversation about school transformation. For board members to really understand their role in governance, and I think it's important that the board themselves understand their role, but also us as community understands their role so that we know what to ask for, what to expect of board members. And so, seeing the board members as ambassadors for the school system, champions for all students, stewards of the system's resources, and trustees for the mission, vision, and values of that. And so it was really important for, I think, the board's facilitator to name that the board, helps set the direction. It only has one employee in the entire district, and that's the superintendent. And the strategies are in the hands of the administration to execute on. And so I thought that was an important thing to just reaffirm. And I think it will be important for us to continue to reaffirm throughout this process and understanding everyone's roles and position as we, really consider what school transformation means. I don't know. What do you think about this part of the conversation, Heather?
I think what I heard, was really just sort of like a grounding in values. And what this reminds me, what I kept thinking last night was like, go slow to go fast. We go slow to go fast. And so, we know that our district is going to be short on money. Not that that's anything new for public schools, but we're really short on money. And we know that when that COVID money runs out at the end of next year, we're all going to have a conversation about it. And I felt like the opportunity for the board to lean into their values and to understand their role. One point, Dr. Webb said, a superintendent cannot do the work of running the district and running around and meeting the demands of 9 individual people. And I was like, to me, like setting that stage of really helping the board sort of understand what is their role. I really appreciated Director Beatty's kind of commentary around that as well. Like really sort of understanding like this is a deep commitment that folks make. I loved Director Joyner's comment about like they would love to see a younger board in some at some time, someone who's much closer to having just finished the school experience. Yeah, so I thought it was a valuable conversation. In that context, I would say I didn't feel really good about doing a most valuable moment or a do better moment, just because like I really felt like this was more of a conversation and a stating of values, and that there wasn't necessarily anything we needed to evaluate in order to share with community what the board did last night.
Yeah, I agree. And so, no do better, most valuable moment tonight, or from last night's meeting. But I did want to, just kind of elevate a couple of things that I heard during the meeting that I think are important. We heard Director Elamine start the meeting by stating, we're having this conversation because we know that the district has too few resources to adequately support their students.
Mm.
And our
Mhm.
ESSER money, our federal aid money that came from the pandemic aid, the COVID aid is running out in about a year. And while we are expecting more resources from this legislative session, it's not going to be enough to kind of cover the ongoing needs of our students. And so we have to really reimagine, rethink how this district operates. And so that's what they're calling this process of reimagining and, implementing a new district is what they're engaging in. And so there isn't really a super clear definition yet. That was what part of the conversation was last night. And so they'll get closer to defining that as this process continues. And they have to define how they're going to relate to community. And I think that's important too.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and and so yeah, so those were a couple of the initial things that stood out to me. I don't know, Heather, what else stood out to you last night?
I think one thing that Dr. Webb said was like, we say community as if we're one community. And actually we have many communities. And I really appreciated that distinction of like, you and I have had long sub conversation about like, what is actual community engagement, right? And then I really appreciated Dr. Webb naming like, we have many communities in our city. I mean, every school is a community, and inside of our school are communities. And so I think this is a really daunting task for our district and our board. And what I like is that they're changing the way they're talking about it. They're changing where they're talking about it. And then they're talking about it in new ways. And let's hope that that leads us to some different results as a community, that we can, get a healthier, more robust way to engage with our many MPS communities as we go through this process.
Yeah. I'd say the last thing that just kind of stood out for me as well was, um, you know, as they were talking about actually a lot of different things. A couple of the themes that continued to come up were, it does seem like the board is like pretty committed to the strategic plan,
Mm.
and feel like they're planning on jettisoning the strategic plan in the midst of this district transformation. It felt like actually, that's where they want to be grounded in. And so I think that's an important thing to name, especially as they, continue the process of developing and approving this current budget, and then, how they're going to allocate resources in the future as we see, resources kind of run low and run out pretty quickly here. So I think that was an important thing. There's real affirmation around ideas of like safety and creating learning environments that are conducive to teaching and learning, which sounds like is a carryover maybe from something they discussed at a previous retreat that took place earlier this year. And there's a real commitment around transparency. People kept saying transparency. I think and equity actually. And so I think there was some conversation around like we really also need to define that term. Like, what does that mean to this board?
Mm. Mm.
Um, and so I think those were a couple of the things that were really discussed, and the visions, the visions that folks had about like what they wanted to see schools be. I know Director Emmerich shared their list on social media, and so if you want to go see that, I think that was an important list to look at. I know that student representative Abdullah last night shared a lot of fantastic things about what their end goal for transformation would be. but again, a lot of it's centered around like how are we supporting our most marginalized students?
Yes.
How are we creating inclusive spaces for those students to actually access high quality education? Um, and I think, and how do we make sure that people are safe, welcome, feeling like they belong? And so I think those are important. Those are important statements made in the ideation process, and now we see how they'll prioritize them as it comes to actually like the definitions that they want to hold true as a full board and not just as individuals. So
It was the beginning. It was a beginning, right? And then we'll make sure to follow along, and we would invite you to follow along with us as we listen to the board and we learn more. So
awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Continue to follow us, like us on social media, share this with your community so that they can also follow along in this district transformation process.
bye.